Hello, let's go ahead and talk about Git and GitHub. Git is a distributed version control system. Version control is about managing multiple versions of documents, programs, and websites. Many real projects use some kind of version control. It's really helpful for team projects because different people can make their changes and then you can merge them, but also it keeps a sort of time machine if you have an individual project that lasts a while. Version control systems include CVS, Subversion, Mercurial, and Git. In this particular class, we will talk about using Git and GitHub. Now, Git is the version control commands that you're going to use. Online, you can use a different version control system to upload your repository. So besides GitHub, there is GitLab. There are some other websites that will also do this for you. But in this particular class, we will be using GitHub. It is kind of up to you if you want to use github.com or another online repository or whatever you want, however you want to host it. But in this case, I have shown you this page that is on github.com. And I've gone ahead and logged in. In this case, I'm using my managed login, but you could also use a personal GitHub account and you can create GitHub repos that way. When you want to create a new repo, you'll click the New button. And so looking at that, I already have some repositories that exist, and that new repository, if it's one that I use a lot, it will appear in this list kind of moving forward. When you click that green New Repository button, it will take you to this page where it will say Create a New Repository. You're going to want to choose an owner and give it a repository name. That is required. And then down here you can change your configuration depending on what kind of project you are doing. For this particular video, I'm just going to leave these as is. Now I'm going to name my repository. So for this particular one, I'm going to call it Web Pages, and then I'm going to click Create Repository. And that will create my repository, which gives me the name, and it gives me a history of my commits, and I can see what my current files are in there. The only thing I have in there so far, which automatically got created when I made my repo, was the readme.md file. So remember, I talked about Git and GitHub as slightly different things. I showed you how to set up a GitHub repo, but that's different from having just a Git repo. The version control system is what allows you to manage files and directories and track changes over time, but what's happening there is I'm going to actually be somehow uploading my files from my local computer into that repository. So far, based on what I've shown you, I don't have a way to set that up. So what we're going to do now is talk about Git, which is how you're going to locally track that history. You can go to gitscm.com and download Git, and there are many ways to integrate Git into your workflow. We're in particular going to use VS Code. You can, of course, check the website for references on how to use these different commands that I talk about over time. Keeping in mind as well, there are some other videos on the class webpage where we talk about how to actually get Git working. So you can go reference those if need be. Once you do have it installed, if you are on a Windows, you're probably going to be using Git Bash. And if you're on a Mac, you will be using it from your terminal. One thing you're going to want to do here is set up your Git config to have your proper username and email in there. Okay, and as I mentioned, we were going to use Visual Studio Code in particular on how to do this. So you can download Visual Studio Code and follow along. I don't actually care how you do this. You can use any text editor that you like, but this is one way to do it that's nicely integrated. So eventually you're going to get this kind of view on your Visual Studio Code or some sort of approximation thereof. I have here some sort of Java project, so this is a different repo that I cloned in, and I have that folder open in my Visual Studio Code, so you can see on the left-hand side, depending on the arrangement of your panes, you should have a file explorer that shows all the files in that particular directory. On the right-hand side, I have put in a Git bash view, which again depends on your layout, and I was able to do that by opening up a terminal. So if you're on Windows, you'll use Control-Shift backtick. If you're on Mac, you'll use Command-Shift backtick, and it should open a terminal for you. On Windows, you will be opening up a Git bash, and on Mac, it's probably going to be bash or ZSH. Well, so how did I get that repo in the first place? Like, I know what my final goal is going to be, but I created that thing online, which didn't even have any files in it yet, and then I have this local directory, but who knows what's going on. So what I want to do is, once I create that online repository, I want to get the files from my repository and basically clone the online version. So it's going to create like a kind of copy of it. So I'm going to make a local repository as a clone of main, meaning I'm going to do git clone something. You're going to fill in that something, that blah, with an appropriate repository. So looking here, looking at some other repository, you're going to click that green code button on your homepage of your repo, and then it should have HTTPS, SSH, and maybe even the command line interface, and then you can copy that code of the name of the repo, and then that's what you would paste into git clone, wherever you want to save it. Now, once you have that cloned onto your local computer, right, and making sure that you put it in a folder you can find, you can then open it in Visual Studio Code. And so at that point, if I have put that in my local directory somewhere, I can open it in Visual Studio Code, and then with that terminal open, I can put in different git commands. If I make some changes to those files, I can type in git diff, and then as I'm changing those, I want to actually upload them to the online repository. So I'm going to do git add, and then that is going to add files to my repository. Now it's still only in your local repository when you do that. So I've made the changes locally but not online. So to actually put those online, to put changes back up into the repository, I'm going to have to do what's called committing. So it's going to be git commit -m, and then in double quotes, I'm going to put in some sort of message. So if I'm doing this from the terminal, that is what I would type in. And then the next thing that I'm going to do to put it online is I'm going to do git push origin. I can then see what is on the repository with a git remote. One tip is to get what is on the repository using git pull, so that if you have made changes elsewhere and pushed them to that repo online, or made the changes online, that you have those changes. You can cause conflicts like this, so you do have to be a little bit careful about your change system, making sure to only make changes in one place and then syncing them up using push and pull before making changes elsewhere. Otherwise, you will cause problems. So the typical workflow is to be local on your Visual Studio Code and then do git pull, which means if you have any changes in your remote repository, it will then be applied to your local. You can always just type in git status just to make sure you know what's going on, and then work on your files locally, then do a git add -all, git commit -m, whatever your commit message is, and then git push. There are many more git commands like git diff cached, --cached, which you can see what the differences are. You can show your current status with git status, and you can also create something called branches, which we won't talk about much in this class, but you can use that to have different changes on different timelines, and you can see your history with git log. You can check out branches. Another one that you can do is git fetch, which is like doing a git pull without actually copying the changes in. Pull will fetch and merge with what you have, so you can also do a git merge. And those are some basic commands. You should explore more to understand what's going on with Visual Studio Code as well, and probably some other command line interfaces, you can click the buttons and they will do the equivalent of whatever these commands are. But with knowing the names of the commands, you would be better able to understand what those steps are that you are taking at each point. So I hope this helps you with making sure that you've set up your Git repo online and that you have a local repo. There are some other videos that will help with understanding what those particular steps are, as this is a high-level overview, and there are other videos that talk step by step on what to do. Thank you for watching.